Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast, coming to you live here from the massive studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Just me today. We've gotten some really good feedback from people, especially a couple of weeks ago. We did a show looking at SaaS applications, not only on the sort of user side applications, but also this emerging set of SaaS applications that are augmenting IT organizations. And, we've got a lot of really good feedback from people that said, hey, please do more of those shows. We want to know kind of the internal architectures of those applications. What do we have to think about as an IT organization? What are the gotchas? And so today we sort of took your feedback, and today we're very, very lucky. We are joined today by Allan Leinwand, who is CTO of ServiceNow, one of the largest SaaS application providers, as well as really just out there helping IT organizations get better. Allan, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So tell me a little bit. You've got a really distinguished background. You've been on really both sides of things. You've been kind of what people would call a customer. You've been out building applications. You've built technology companies as an entrepreneur. Give folks a little bit of your background, not only prior to ServiceNow, but what you're really focused on now at ServiceNow.
Yeah, happy to. I was lucky enough to start my career here in the Valley way too many years ago at HP. And back at HP, I was involved in installing these little boxes called San Francisco Systems routers and deploying them all across the planet to build what then would be called one of the first private internets. I actually helped write some of the software to manage that as well, and ended up joining Cisco Systems, as that little router company was called, back in the very early 90s, and spent about 7 years there. And I did everything at Cisco, from engineering network management products to working on routing protocols to helping design enterprise networks and service provider networks. Really an amazing experience at Cisco. I think we went from 100 folks or so to many, many tens of thousands over that period of time. I did venture out into the startup world. I did a couple of startups in the dot-com era of the late 90s. Also was really lucky enough to end up in the venture capital world for about 7.5 years, doing investment around infrastructure technologies and probably what we now call cloud. And I popped back out to the sort of the worker bee side of the world and ended up running CTO of infrastructure over at Zynga, which is a consumer gaming company, as I think a lot of you know, from its Farmville, Mafia Wars, Cityville fame, and have been over here at ServiceNow just about 4 years now, helping build the enterprise cloud company and building out really a cloud that helps enterprises automate workflows. It's really been an exciting time to sort of see the transformation that's happened in the enterprise. It's night and day from the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s to where we are today.
Right.
That's just a bit of my background. I'm generally an infrastructure sort of guy and a cloud software sort of guy. That's kind of where I've been playing around for a while.
Yeah, no, that's outstanding. It's a little bit of everything, kind of how the internet evolved, how applications have evolved, and talk a little bit. I've been reading a series of blogs that you wrote, and one of the things that you said was really you were passionate about as you moved to ServiceNow. You said, I'm really excited about what's going on in the enterprise. Give us a sense of, having been on sort of the consumer side with Zynga and now on the other side with ServiceNow and enterprises. Like, what were those things that drew you there? What do you see as the really big differences from a technology perspective, or even just an operations perspective between consumer and enterprise?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I've been lucky to see both sides, because what really sort of drives me, and it gets to the root of your question when you ask it, is about building at scale. When you're doing things on the consumer side, you have to be able to handle tens of millions of gameplay adopters happening within hours. It's just a stunning sort of vertical climb as you see adoption of things, as we see in the news today with things like Pokemon Go and things like that are happening. In the enterprise side, there is also an incredible adoption happening. Enterprise IT and sort of the enterprise mantra has sort of moved from what I like to call the old server huggers and guys who used to fix printers into folks that really want to empower their enterprise. They really want to be sort of the winners, the folks that drive new services. Enterprise IT, maybe 10, 15 years ago was really sort of seen as the place that innovation really was lacking. And now we're seeing with SaaS applications and other applications that are appearing in the cloud, enterprise IT is kind of becoming heroes. They're becoming the folks that can come into a line of business, they can go to facilities, they can go to legal, they can go to HR departments, and they can really help get things done faster. And that's what really drove me into ServiceNow, to be sort of candid and upfront. When I first looked at ServiceNow, it was an IT automation system, an IT help desk system, really focused on automating IT processes, spinning up servers, spinning up VMs, looking at managing IT infrastructure. And that's exciting, but it's not the scale of being able to take every possible thing that an enterprise is trying to do and make it run faster. Example would be something like onboarding new employees. When a new employee comes on board an enterprise, think of all the things that have to happen. You have to get them a place to sit. You have to think about what their machine is going to be. You got to get them logins to email. You need to get them physical badges in card readers. You need to set up a telephone for them to work with. You need to get them installed in the payroll system. You need to get them installed to maybe use the corporate gym. There's just all these things that have to occur that take up time within the enterprise. A lot of them used to get done in email and word of mouth and walking up to the right guy at the right location and the right building who knew how to do these sorts of things. But imagine if you could take every process from something as simple as onboarding to something as complicated as finding a new vendor and doing a whole new purchasing process and make it run faster. That's kind of where the new enterprise is going, and that's kind of what we spend our time thinking about here.
Right. No, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's a way to sort of directly associate yourself to, either back end revenue or back end cost savings, front end revenue, all those types of things. You're a technologist at heart.
Exactly.
You're a technologist at heart. Lots of IT operations people kind of get drawn to sort of the IaaS side of cloud because, it looks and feels like what they're used to. There's lots of moving parts and so forth. And so people dig into that. The SaaS side of the world, people tend to sort of go, well, it's just taken care of. I don't really worry about what's under the covers too much, or at least it's not as visible. So hence it doesn't get debated as much. You've been really transparent lately. ServiceNow has been very transparent lately about, kind of what goes on in your cloud. What are some of those really basic things that people need to be looking for from a cloud tool, a cloud platform, and just, kind of the things that aren't common sense for maybe IT that they need to think about as they're looking to move, into leveraging public cloud or building out hybrid cloud availability?
Yeah, you bring up a good point. I think the way you summarize the situation, I tend to look at it slightly the same way, but maybe with a slightly different analogy. You're right. Enterprise IT and enterprise IT folks have really, over time, built solutions. If you'd gone to an enterprise IT department 10 or 15 years ago and said, I need a software application that does X, Y, Z to drive the business forward, they would have put a project plan together and they would have talked about buying data center space and procuring servers and setting up some middleware stack and maybe get into a load balancer and then a firewall and then security would get involved. It's sort of what I call the puzzle piece. You spread the puzzle out, and IT guys are famous for putting the puzzle pieces together and spending a lot of time talking about how to get that full picture built, right? But in the SaaS world, just because you don't put the puzzle together doesn't necessarily mean that, you can't add a ton of value into the process. You can still go to that same business entity, and instead of saying, let me tell you about the servers I'm going to buy from Dell or HP and the load balancers and the firewalls and everything that I'm doing the wiring, and isn't this super cool and really fun and exciting, why don't you go and talk to them about, let me tell you how I can configure a tool that can really drive your business forward. Let me build that workflow for you. Let me get it running in days instead of months or hours. And you're right. A lot of people have sort of fallen into the infrastructure as a service model because those are the puzzle pieces they're used to having, on the table. But the puzzle can be presented to you at a fully built piece of art. It can be something that's ready to go. And that's really sort of the power of sort of this next-gen SaaS. So when we take a look at our offering, we take a look at what we want to talk to people about, we are very happy to be transparent, and I very much appreciate the fact you notice that. We think when you present to IT and when you present to an enterprise, you have to be transparent. You have to show them what's there so that way they trust it in the same way they would trust something sitting in their own data center. But once you get over that hurdle, once people sort of made the mental switch to, I don't need to assemble the puzzle. I can now get this beautiful piece of beautiful piece of art and hang it on the wall and admire it and now start to use it. That's really where things have changed. So in our world, what we want people to think about is, how do I take this SaaS platform and how do I build a workflow, whether it's around security operations or whether it's around other IT constructs. And as you might have read on some of the blogs we've done, we've really done a unique architecture there. It's an architecture we call multi-instance. And the architecture is really about giving people an environment within that SaaS platform that looks and feels as much as possible like something would be sitting in their data center. For example, in a multi-instance architecture, we give folks application, Java, Tomcat virtual machines that are dedicated to their own environment. We give them a database process, a MySQL database process that's dedicated to their instance, their portion of our environment. That's very different from a lot of other SaaS providers out there that sort of try and use a software stack and then carve it up in individual pieces of software in a multi-tenant mode. And we think that's something that really helps us differentiate. So sort of sum all that up, infrastructure as a service is easily consumable by IT because it's what they're used to consuming, but consuming something that can get them solutions for their business faster, but looks close enough and operates in a way that they're used to operating it, we think is a really powerful combination.
Yeah. Let me dig into that concept of sort of multi-tenancy versus multi-instance a little bit. You know, a lot's changed. You know, I was at Cisco back in the 90s as well, and you used to think about, okay, you're gonna have to build out, you know, kind of separate things, and sometimes there was some things like VLANs and stuff that would logically separate stuff. And you know, since then we've seen a lot evolve. We've seen virtual machines that carve up physical servers. We've seen containers, and like, if somebody were to sort of ask you to how do I explain this? You know, what is that real difference? What's the not so much always the technical difference between multi-tenancy and multi-instance, but what's the operational realities of you know, both on your side from a ServiceNow perspective, but more importantly to an end customer? Why should they care whether you have one architecture or the other?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, back in our early days at Cisco, you remember the cut through versus store and forward, you know, debates, and the end result was always, could you move the packets fast enough, and what was the benefit to the network, right?
Right.
And I think that's something we want to look at. While we can argue architectural differences, you know, at the end of the day, how does the enterprise consume the service, and how does that change for them? Well, let me give you a couple of cases in point. In multi-instance, as I said, every customer gets their own Java virtual machines that holds their own application logic, and they get their own database process that holds their data. So their data, by definition, is isolated both at a data structure and at a process level. So similarly, in an enterprise app, when you spin up a SQL Server or a MySQL database or an Oracle database inside of your enterprise, that's dedicated to that app. So it's very similar. The benefits of that are multifold. Not only is it the physical and logical separation, but it's also the fact that those application logic containers and those database instances are unique to you. That means, for example, you can upgrade when you want. In a multi-tenant environment where everyone's sharing a database, when that database gets upgraded, guess what? Everyone gets upgraded at the same time. From an enterprise point of view, that has some pretty interesting implications. Maybe your users aren't ready for that upgrade. Maybe there's some compliance issues you want to deal with. Maybe there's some security concerns around that upgrade when it occurs. Well, we give people the ability to schedule their own upgrade of their app on our environment on their schedule. Full stop. I mean, that's how we think about it. Yep. There's also, you know, other things to think about. If you're running a large database, a large Oracle instance, for example, that serves hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of customers, you spend a lot of time maintaining it because you don't want it to go down. So you end up with these large maintenance windows and lots of time being spent, you know, maintaining Oracle RAC and SANS and all the things that we've done in the past. Well, when you actually have individual databases and individual application logic per customer, you can maintain them and do maintenance on them individually, which means your maintenance windows are far shorter, which means higher availability. So we've seen, you know, incredibly short, you know, minutes of maintenance in our environment for individual customers over quarters and years. And we've seen, multi-tenancy have to take things down for, don't quote me on this one, but I think I saw Oracle say that they're going to take down their cloud is either 10 hours a week or 10 hours a month for all their customers for maintenance. Yeah. So it's just a marked difference when you think about being able to build small autonomous units that are managed individually, both by ourselves on the back end and by the customer on the front end, and by building large, homogeneous multi-tenancy environments that impinge on the enterprise's ability to use it. You get forced upgrades, you get one single environment, you have large maintenance windows, you have poor availability.
I have to imagine that also has some implications. You guys have a multitude of customers in a lot of different verticals, different industries, different geographic regions. I got to imagine that has an implication if customer A has certain service, certain compliance requirements or security requirements, another customer has different for the industry they're in. Like, give me a sense. How does that impact them being able to say, hey, we got an inquiry, we got a legal inquiry, we've got to be able to pull certain amounts of data out of there. How does that impact them, or does it give them more flexibility because of the multi-instance architecture?
Yeah, the multi-instance architecture really lets them view everything that's going on within our cloud for their environment. They can pull logs, they can pull audit logs, the data is fully exportable. There's not now we need to extract these portions of this database and filter it out for customer X as opposed to customer Y. It's nothing like that at all. It makes it very linear in order to do that. And, certain customers have lots of different requirements. You mentioned, pulling data and logging and compliance, but there's other things around, Q4, you can't do any upgrades because it's a large e-commerce site, or we happen to be doing some compliance testing with the FDA, and it means that the data has to be resident for 90 days before it can be changed. Or we're a federal government, whether it's, our U.S. government or some other government, and the data needs to be in a special environment and needs to have multi-factor before anybody can get to it. All these things are configurable, and they all sit sort of at the heart of our cloud infrastructure. On top of all that, the applications obviously benefit from that. They leverage those pieces of infrastructure as well as those technologies in order to sort of provide the workflow and services we've been talking about.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. It makes sense. Let me shift gears a little bit. You said early on, IT was sort of about, automating some things, change management, that sort of stuff. ServiceNow sort of now lives at this intersection between, ITIL, sort of existing processes, and DevOps, right? People building, like you said, modern applications, kind of being the front side of the business. How much do you I assume you get a chance to talk to a lot of different customers. How much do you find that transition to these more modern applications, more modern things is people and process driven versus, really having the right framework of tools and platforms underneath to help accelerate that?
Well, I think it's kind of both, but I kind of live in the religion that tools can't dictate process or people. It's kind of the old axiom, you can lead a horse to water sort of thing, right? I think that you can provide great tools, but if the company's organization and the people in the process don't want to support it, they're just not going to use it. In our world, what we want to do is we want to give people the environment. We want to give them, an IDE in our environment, integration into things like Git. We want to give them all the tools that they'd want to use in a general DevOps-y sort of world, but we also want to be able to have them publish those updates immediately and have them available across the internet via our service as often as they'd like. It's an interesting spot because we are both in the ITIL incident problem change cab world, and we also are in the DevOps you build it, you own it, you run it world. And how do those two really go together? And I think it depends on the organization and how they handle it. I'll give you an example. In our world, when a customer calls into ServiceNow, and I should mention, and hopefully it's obvious, but we run ServiceNow and run our ServiceNow DevOps and our own ITIL process on ServiceNow. So we build ServiceNow on ServiceNow to operate ServiceNow. It's really redundant really quick, but recursive really quick, I should say. But if a customer of ours calls in and they open up an incident, and that incident in the IT world generates a problem, otherwise known as a bug, And that bug, in turn, then has to be put into our development cycle. That bug, or that PRB, that problem, gets put into a backlog, which then runs through a story and an epic, and eventually, hopefully, gets prioritized and ends up in a shipping piece of code. But the connection from that incident to that problem to the problem resolution to close the incident is a full circle we think is super important in the DevOps world. You notice what we just did is we combined an ITIL concept of incident and problem and change, whether it be code or configuration, into a DevOps process of stories and epics. And I think putting those things together, at least for our business, makes a lot of sense because we let the engineers run the process and the life cycle they want, but at the same time we have sort of the ITIL overarching process that allows our customers to get the responsiveness they see. What we've seen in a lot of other environments is you'll open up an incident or a bug with a given enterprise, and they'll then turn and do the swivel chair thing, and they'll swivel over to a different system to file a bug for the engineers to go work on. And that connection back from when does the bug actually get resolved, when does the problem get resolved, and how does it tie back to closing the incident is something we think is super important for running our business. And we hope that it makes sense for other folks because that's what we think they're using our platform for as well. It's just another workflow, right? It's a customer service tied to engineering workflow from our perspective.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Or am I missing the point?
No. It's an interesting way of looking at it because it takes sort of the chaos that goes on with customers, which is, their business is going to go wherever it goes on a day-to-day basis, which, might be short-term or long-term, which kind of aligns to some of the changes going on with DevOps and Agile and stories and everything. And then you're putting a structure around that, which, like you said, to a certain extent, it's going to help, manage all that, different inputs, different levels of chaos and so forth. But at the same time, you're putting modernization around those tools. You're leveraging Git. You're leveraging, version control. You've got, common collaboration that all your teams can use. It's an interesting, I think what it highlights is, while people want to talk about, whether they talk about DevOps or ITIL or whatever bucket they want to put the newest thing in, it's very rarely just that bucket, right? There's always some sort of blended transition that goes on, and you've got to figure out how to deal with both of them. Actually, it's a good thing.
I was just going to augment what you said there, but the one thing we want to be able to do, and one report that we look at, is we look at number of problems that have been opened associated with an incident and then the age of those problems. Generally that's something kind of hard to do, right? A customer calls in, they open up an incident. Meanwhile, over here in XYZ system, I've filed a bunch of bugs, Bugzilla or pick your favorite, and I've got to somehow correlate. Now, these bugs are associated with which customer calls, and how do we tie that back? But we think it's really important to tie that into that closed loop to really marry the process of how we run our business with the tool we have. And, I think a lot of folks are going through that transition. I have a lot of discussion with enterprise CIOs around, I'm running a process for my IT team, I'm running a process for HR, I'm doing a workflow automation with ServiceNow for onboarding a new process, a new technology into the enterprise. But the development guys are doing something else over to the side. And I think that as businesses take a step back and realize that they need to tie those workflows together, it's going to be an interesting industry change.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'm going to sort of wrap this up with one last question. We were talking a little bit early on about your background. You've had quite a bit of experience in getting applications out into the cloud, kind of helping to change business models. What do you give guidance wise as you talk to customers, especially ones that say, hey, we know we've got to be more responsive to the marketplace. We want to get new applications out into the cloud. Like what's your guidance to them? What are usually the first steps or the areas that you try and help them avoid, getting, banging their knees up as much as they could?
That's a good way of putting it. Well, a couple things. One we always tell people is don't boil the ocean. It's very hard to have a big bang where everything changes. It's probably been maybe one of those successfully in the universe. So I think that trying to bite off smaller pieces is super important. And once you get the ball rolling, you'd be surprised how quickly do it. People will hop on board the new system. The other thing to think about is how do you get visibility? So you can create a small bite of the apple, but if you don't get visibility into that, then perhaps that's not going to be something that's going to get you the momentum you want. So we look for things that are visible across the org, things like building a service catalog that all employees can go to. We had a service catalog sort of aha here at ServiceNow. We were handling a lot of IT requests, as a lot of people do, and one day we realized that a large number of our service requests, and the number one most popular service request was, how do I get access to the company gym? So it's just one of those things that people kept opening tickets on. I can't get access to company gym. The little bit of backstory on that is we didn't want to give people access to the company gym until they signed the waiver to make sure that they weren't going to hurt themselves and they were been properly trained on the equipment. So your badge didn't automatically work on the company gym door. So we started with our service catalog, and one of the very first things we stuck on the top bold section of the service catalog is, how do I get access to the gym? And boom, that workflow took off and started getting automation. And then as we started to, tickle down sort of the various things that we wanted to empower the employees to do in a self-service way, people started to get the power of the platform and started to use it a lot more frequently. So, don't boil the ocean. Pick one that's common. Try and get some data that will find a service catalog item or a workflow that'll be impactful to more than just one group. And, I think moving at a pace that's perhaps faster and puts people a little more uncomfortable is challenging, but at the same time very, very rewarding. The cloud itself allows you to move faster than you're used to moving. Challenge yourself. We hear about people deploying workflows and new portions of our platform in days and weeks, not quarters and years. So challenge yourself a little bit on timelines. Challenge us if you're using us to actually help you get there. And bite things off one step at a time, and you'd be surprised how quickly the ball gets rolling. That's generally my sage advice.
No, I think that's excellent, and the story that you told is fantastic. I think it highlights something I try and mention to a lot of people is there's so much sort of insight to your customers, to your market, just in your logs, in the things that they tell you every day, that the context around where they click on or don't click on, that gives you as much insight as to any other sort of market intelligence that's out there. So that's a great story. Hey, listen, I want to wrap this up. Where can people, if they want to reach out to you and talk a little more about, kind of the architectures you're building, the philosophy, what's a good way for people to get in touch with you? Where are you going to be out and about if they want to, buy you a beer and pick your brain a little bit?
Well, that's a good question. I'm always up for, meeting people. Probably the easy way to do it is I'm just at Leinwand on Twitter. It's LEINWAND. Otherwise, feel free to reach out to me directly on email, Allan, ALLAN, .Leinwand @ServiceNow.com. Always looking forward to talking to folks, and if they have questions or queries, send them my way. You'll find I'm communicative.
Fantastic.
I tend to use this thing called the internet a lot. So
you build it, you might as well use it. No, that's great. Allan, thank you so much for being on today. This has been very, very interesting. Folks, we're going to wrap it up for Allan and for Aaron, who should be back next week from all of his travels. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.